What challenge did your team focus on?
So the challenge that we had, and of course Marvin and Lauri can add information, but the challenge we decided to work with was how to identify the sentences or words that have a high potential for bias. And in the prompt, there was sort of an emphasis on gender bias, but we was open to other biases as well. So we chose to look at both gender bias, but also racial bias. And with the solution that Lauri was talking about, Word2Vec, the idea was to try to identify with different words or sentences when words are sort of more closely associated with one gender or another, or one race or another, and that can sort of highlight the potential risk for bias in those kinds of sentences.
So how would such a program work?
Yes, basically how it works is you give in a sentence, and then a program would analyze the words in the sentence, basically compare them with categories that we define, like gender or race, and the details there is how to set up these categories, but it will check them, and whenever it sees that there's a high correlation with a potential bias, it will just flag out and show you which words in a sentence have the potential to be mistranslated with a certain bias. So then the user just gives the text and then receives like a list of words inside the text and the location, which could be potentially problematic.
Is this something that we could expect to see working in the field of AI soon?
Well, soon is a bit of a relative word here, but yeah, we are definitely continuing on this work, and we are looking to first have this backend solution, so the initial idea working properly, and then from there looking to expand it to be easily used by either translators or even researchers.
I was just going to say that already the level that we got to during the hackathon is that we had a database with that was significant enough that we could get some kind of returns on our example sentences. So for instance, by typing the sentence, the nurse is happy, we could highlight the word nurse is closer to women than to men based on the database. So then we can see that there's a high risk or chance of gender bias when translating that word to English or from English. And what we can imagine is that down the line, we can have, maybe more, non-binary gender. We can go deeper into race. We can have other kinds of biases. But at this point, that's already the kind of results we can get, which is quite significant. And maybe something we didn't mention is just why we were even looking at this issue is, of course, it was the prompt of the hackathon, but all of us speak several languages. I mean, Lauri is Finnish, Marvin is he's German, I'm French. We're all communicating in English together, and we all see all the time how things are sometimes understood a little bit differently, or the way that things are reported in the news, or even legal system. You can go quite far with it, but these words, when interpreted in a different way, can have quite a big impact.
Are there any limitations you envisage with your solution at this stage?
Yes, the limitations are in that way that, first of all, it will spot potentially more, or it will highlight more areas than actually susceptible to to bias. So, for example, you give a sentence with several words. For example, the black man stands on the street, and then we would see that obviously the word black would be highlighted, perhaps, but also the word man would be highlighted, just because man correlates with man a lot. So yeah, you see a few problems that used to lead to more flags than there might be useful, and more data that you actually want. So there's definitely a bit of work to do, and extra logic to bring in to bring the system to a point where it basically reduces the output only to the data that you want.
how far away or what the distance do you think is for us to be still removing gender or racial bias on a global scale in machine translations?
I would say quite far in a global scale. So definitely there's a lot of work to do. And it's like Marvin has said before in this event that he was speaking in, that it is not only an issue of machine translation, but it's an issue in society. So that's the underlying issue.
Yeah, because we're working with databases of texts that were created by humans based on the biases that we have. So, I mean, we hear it all the time, but when we train algorithms or models based on what we do, then they just kind of replicate whatever biases that we have. So that's definitely a limitation, that we can identify something, but if it exists in what we are doing as humans, can we really filter it out with the AI? That's a question. And then we're also wondering, what if we are translating a document that is biased in itself? Is it important for the translation to be accurate by translating the bias, or do we want to filter it out with a translation? In which case we're losing the meaning, but we're creating a fairer text or content. So that's also a question that we would even have to answer. Like, what is the objective? Is it to produce text that is unbiased, or to be very faithful to the translation? And for now, we're not sure. Maybe we can let the users decide what they would prefer and allow them to evaluate.
It comes with the tool, the word-to-back, like with any machine learning tool. It will only be as good as the data that we have. So the biggest limitation, of course, is the data itself. And just like she said, if the data is created by random people over the world, then we have this bias in there. If you want to have clean data, then people have to create this data set, which is a big limitation because, you know, a lot of time will go into that. So there we have the limitations also of our solution is that we can't really control that much the data that we have to work with.
As of now, do you know of any examples or of programs or tactics already in place to avoid bias in translations?
Well, I mean, the others can complete as well, but from what we saw, it's more so that nowadays you have these translation tools. I mean, even you have professional tools that translator use, but then you have also these big audience products like Google Translate or DeepL that we're all familiar with. I think just throwing in some sentences here and there. And there are some efforts to highlight bias or maybe give alternative translations. So the example that we often see is that when translating a word from English to German, that it might give you two alternatives of the sentences, giving, you know, both doctor as male and doctor as female, and then you can choose which one is a better fit for what you're trying to say. But that's as far as it goes, that it maybe gives you two alternatives, and it may not work for every language. It doesn't solve the issue of beyond English. Is it able to identify the biases or the different potential translations? So what we're trying to do is to make it more applicable to more cases and be maybe a bit more specific than just, okay, you could translate it this way or that way, but okay, there's a bias here, so maybe a human needs to take a closer look.
Yeah. Also, there's some research being done in that field, obviously. So there are some papers and some tools out there that try to tackle this challenge. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're not aware of any solution that really tackles it as an application and not a research project.
And in terms of AI translations, let's say, what would you like to see happen in the years to come?
I mean, the whole topic is quite huge, but I mean, it is already working pretty well, very well, I think. So I think everyone has used it or is using it right now. And I think the only problem is really that it's not working 100%. It's working, I don't know, 95%. And that really prohibits it from being a tool that you can 100% put your trust on. So if it went from 95% to 99%, then this would probably be good enough to translate things and basically send it out without having the fear of having a mistranslation in there. And I think we have to get these last 4 to 5%, but these are obviously, I guess, also the hardest 4 or 5%. And this we have to solve, I think. And then we have pretty well translation systems that are also pretty smart. And I think when this is the case and things are translated in a fair way, people will read it, and you know, in their conscience or subconscious, they will also maybe lose bias, because our brain as well works as like a machine learning algorithm. We see things and we replicate them without really thinking about it. It just goes into our brain. So maybe this way we also reprogram ourselves a bit over time.
Yeah. Maybe I can send and you can say. Or...
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, I guess what I would like to see is somehow that meaning would be more exactly transferred or translated. I'm not sure exactly how that would be possible, but that you could really get the same meaning, the same feeling. And sometimes that's not possible because the same words don't exist, but if there would be a way to do that. And then maybe similar to what Marvin also said, is that ultimately we should be able to also target the biases that we have as humans that just kind of propagate themselves in the text and whatever other parts of society. So if either it could help us to get rid of that bias, or even highlight it, that even if you're not translated, that it shows, okay, there is bias in this text, or there is bias in the way that this is being presented, then it does allow us over time to, without censoring, of course, but just kind of learn to understand when the bias is there, and then we can be more mindful.
Yeah, for me, now in social media platforms, you have these automatic translations nowadays that are more prominent, and these are less and less obvious that it was translated by a machine, and sometimes it's the translation is clunky. So it would be very, very nice to have this like very good way of knowing what was it translated or not. And another aspect is that this, when it's used by a big pool of people, these kind of biases that machine translation tools have will eventually then make their way into the use of language, because people have been seeing this wrongly translated sentences or concepts. So that is something that would, in quite immediate future, have to be tackled.
So this time you participated and you had an experience of the hackathon. What would you say to someone thinking about participating in the next hackathon, if there is one?
Do it.
That's good.
Yeah, it's a great way to in like low stress environment, get to know new technologies, new people, new ideas. So
yeah, definitely, like Lauri said, I mean, and we were discussing before, but I think hackathons, when you're in school, you're at work, you have these projects that you can't really choose sometimes, and they can go on for a long time, and you have kind of high stakes that you have to have happy clients or good grades or whatever. And hackathons, you can really throw ideas at the wall. You can't overthink because you don't have time, and you just try to produce something without thinking, how well can it work in 5 years? You just, I mean, somewhat, but you can really try something a little bit crazy and just not put so many boundaries. And yeah, sometimes you work with people that you know, but you get to know them in a different way by working together like this. Sometimes you meet completely new people, but yeah, it's stressful, definitely. It's a lot of work in a short amount of time, but it pushes you to be more creative and not overthink. So definitely do it.
I also would totally agree here. I would say participate and really take your time to talk to as many people, as many helpers at Hackathon, mentors, people who give the challenges. Just talk to as many people as you can, and then really understand the problem. Because as Aïcha said, if you work in your work, you have the same problems, the same field, but now a hackathon is really a time where you can go into another domain and really explore it and ask all your questions and learn about something new that you haven't had on your radar now. And that really, I think, is a very nice experience. And then you can just be creative and you can just create something. And if it works out, it's great. And if it doesn't, also not too bad, because now you learned something about a new domain and maybe you learned new skills and get to know new people. So definitely a win-win, whatever you do.
And finally, if you would use one word to describe the hackathon, what would that word be?
Well, for me, I would say it's always intense.
Okay, so we have intense,
Interesting.
interesting, intense, interesting, and
Now we have a new constraint. No, I was going to say generative, because you have to come up with ideas, then you hear all the other groups and their ideas, and yeah, just a lot of new thoughts being generated.
oh, that's fair enough. So we can do IGI, maybe interesting, generative, and intense. Oh, but fine.
Yeah, innovative.
Innovative. Okay, so we have both the sets now. That's great. Thank you so much for your time. With that, I have formally ended my list of questions.